Hey everyone. Today's video is on Dr. Subreddit, what happened when you diagnosed a COVID-19 denier with COVID-19. So let's jump into it. ICU nurse here. Dealt with COVID since March 2020. November to February was rough. I had a 2-week streak where every day 1 or 2 of my patients would die. We'd go up to 3 or 4 patient assignments. The norm is 2, 1 or 1 if on certain equipment. Most all of the patients understood the severity of what they had. A handful didn't believe they had COVID, even though removing high-flow their BiPAP would put their SATs down into the 60s or 70s. Many had comorbidities that put them at risk: COPD, asthma, obesity, sleep apnea, smoking. I think people would refuse to be intubated because they knew what the outcome would be. Fight, hope, pray, fingers crossed, whatever you want to call it. Delaying the inevitable. Our ICU attending would actually have them sign consent for intubation. Almost all of them died. Very few made it out alive, but still so sick and debilitated. One guy in particular sticks out. This was right after Christmas. 21 years old, HX1 Deutschmark, obesity, sleep apnea, didn't like to take his insulin. Admitted with COVID. Didn't believe he had it. Should have been tubed days before but refused, then he ended up being intubated emergently. Took about 5 of us to prone him because his O2 SATs were in the 60s. Couldn't get a pulse. Had to flip him back over to CPR for about an hour or so before we called it. Had a kid and a fiancé. Honestly, it was more of the families that denied their loved one had COVID. Upset about not being able to visit. Zoom calls just don't cut it. I say this all as my parents are all COVID deniers, even when I tell them what it's like. Well, those people had other things wrong with them though. They were older, they tell me. They send me links about all the conspiracy theories COVID. I got the Moderna in December and January, still haven't told them. It's awful. The facial swelling alone from being prone is enough to give a person nightmares. Watching someone go into multi-system organ failure, needing dialysis, unable to put them back onto their back. Being maxed out on ventilator settings, and that still not being enough to the point of barotrauma and collapsing a lung and needing a chest tube to reinflate it. Families saying do everything, even though they had coded once or twice. Hearing families on Zoom crying, praying, singing as the patient is intubated, sedated, and paralyzed so the ventilator can do the work. Tearing up under all the PPE because yeah, we are still human. We work so hard and sometimes it doesn't fucking matter. But we go back, day after day. I wish people who don't believe could see what I have seen. It might scare them enough to take precautions seriously and get the vaccine. ER doctor here. I diagnose people with COVID on the daily. Some people are actually really great about it, others are more difficult. I'll tell you a tale that occurred during my most recent shift. Back-to-back rooms and patients. Patient A, in room number 4, is a 23-year-old male, no medical history, comes in with body aches, malaise, and fatigue. Also had some mild nausea without abdominal pain or vomiting. Patient B, in room number 5, is a 51-year-old female, medical history of intermittent asthma, so she uses a puffer infrequently, comes in with shortness of breath, has some possible fevers at home. In triage it was noted that this patient's oxygen SATs were in the 88 range and her heart rate wasn't elevated. Interestingly, when asked if she thought she had COVID, she said, "I can't have it. I tested negative 2 weeks ago when my son tested positive." He's been sick at home. You guessed it. Both people COVID positive. Patient A went home. He's doing great. Was extremely remorseful, and before he had even left the ED he called his work to let them know he was positive and to get everyone there tested because he figured he had gotten the illness at work. IRC he worked in a small family-owned warehouse as a foreman. He also called his parents and they were getting him set up to sleep in the garage until his quarantine was up. I respected this guy. Patient B got admitted to the hospital because her O2 SATs weren't great. When I went back to tell her she was COVID positive, she called me a liar and told me I must have made a mistake. She threatened to sign out against medical advice, but when she got up to leave she got so short of breath the nurse used it to convince her to stay. People are strange sometimes. I try not to let stuff bother me, but COVID deniers come very close to crossing that line. ICU COVID ICU charge nurse here. Had a woman try leaving the ER against medical advice with COVID and was needing tons of O2. Our docs convinced her to get admitted. My wife was her ER nurse and brought her up to me. Patient was yelling and screaming, ripping off her mask, spitting and telling us we're all sheep between gasping for breath. Our docs told her she was close to needing to be intubated and she just scoffed. We reached out to the husband who proceeded to swear and berate us, telling us we're keeping her prisoner and that we can do whatever we need because none of this is real and it's all for show so you guys can get paid. She gets intubated, recompensates over the next few days, and finally codes. We code her for well over 1.5 hours before calling her time of death. The kicker was calling her husband and getting absolutely excoriated because we injected her with COVID as an experiment and killed her. He then had to be escorted out of the hospital when he came in to try getting up to the unit. This shit's getting exhausting. So COVID isn't real, but you injected her with COVID. Come on. These people are grown adults. They just kept denying they had it, stated they had something else, and tried to leave against medical advice while on high-flow nasal cannula, which we didn't let him do because he would have died within minutes. Before he was admitted to the hospital, he was symptomatic but refused to isolate at home. He gave it to his wife who ended up in the ICU. I just don't understand what these people get out of saying it's something else. If it's something else, wouldn't that mean they believe there's something terrible out there anyway? I don't know, it's stupid. I don't get it. Because that would mean that they were wrong. Nurse here. I had COVID and now I'm in rehabilitation because my lungs are at 70% capacity. I was at 40% capacity, and now when I hear someone say that, I have the urge to slap them. I will need another year until I'm fully recovered. Sorry to hear this. I hope you get better. My mother is an ICU traveling nurse. It gives her trauma but she powers through. She talks about how angry sad she is to know some people believe COVID is fake even after hundreds of thousands have died. She also gets upset because they know someone is going to die, but they have to focus on this person instead of helping people who have a chance. I honestly don't know what I would do in her position. Petition for Healthcare Workers Day. ICU is a lot harder than my part. And traveling makes it even harder. I'm mostly just helping out and amuse the patients a bit. And yes, it is sad. It will take another year until I'm fully recovered. But I hope I can work next month. My mom works for an OBGYN who specializes in high-risk pregnancies and births. And he was called into the hospital to check out a woman whose due date was about 2 weeks away and who was very sick. He confirmed she had COVID and admitted her to the hospital until she gave birth, but she insisted it was a hoax and ended up checking herself out AMA, but not before she spat in the face of the nurse, who coincidentally had just completed chemo. That was near the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm so curious what happened to that lady. The nurse is okay, thank goodness. That is at least assault, but possibly so much more depending on the outcome. For sure. I asked my mom about it recently, and she said the nurse is fine and that she has no info on what happened to the patient. What the fuck? This makes me so mad reading that poor nurse. Bless her soul. I'm an attending physician at our triage unit. On a Friday, an older gentleman came in with his entire family, none of them with a face mask. All had mild COVID symptoms except him. He was saturating 80% with evident shortness of breath. We insisted in doing PCR and a chest CAT scan looking for COVID, but he and his wife refused, saying that COVID wasn't real and it was just a bacterial infection. The more we talked with him, the more agitated he got, to the point that his face was red. We suggested hospitalizing him to stabilize him and start treatment. But they accused us of exaggerating his symptoms and that we only wanted to hospitalize him so we could steal the liquid in his knees, a stupid rumor that was going around when this whole thing started. They both cursed at us and said they were going to a better hospital to get antibiotics. Fast forward 24 hours later on Saturday. We get a call from the hospital next county over telling us that they intubated one of our patients because he went into respiratory failure when he arrived and they had to transfer him here because they don't have the appropriate equipment. We transfer the patient on Sunday only to find out on the CAT scan he had 90% of lung damage. He passed away on Monday morning. Just before the family took the body away, I gave the widow the death certificate, and before walking away, she turns around and waves the certificate yelling, "See? I told you it wasn't COVID. It says here, death due to pulmonary pneumonia due to SARS-CoV-2. I knew it was a bacteria. I told her, SARS-CoV-2 is COVID-19, ma'am. It because everyone's asking what happened afterwards, not much." She yelled, "No, it's SARS. It's a bacteria," and stormed off. It's actually one of the mildest encounters I've had with a grieving widow. It's difficult to argue with a genius, but it's impossible to argue with an idiot. This also reminds me of the wizard's first rule: people will believe any lie if they want enough for it to be true, or are afraid enough that it might be. My worst experience was when a 2-year-old kid got diagnosed with COVID. His mother had brought him with CO fever and diarrhea. The child was severely dehydrated, and so we had to do a mandatory swab test since we planned to admit him. It came positive and the mother refused to admit it. We were ready to perform a repeat test, and we even advised for the parents to get tested. Her defense was, the child never left the house. It's just I and the father who go to work daily. The grandmother babysits while we are away. How can he even get COVID without leaving the house? She had called her husband. He came with 10-15 relatives in a car. They broke a few chairs and then left with the baby. We just informed about the case to the COVID control center. A family full of clowns? That's the only explanation I can come up with. Fun fact, clowns actually have a code of ethics. It's called the 8 Commandments. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and for more content like this subscribe to Reddit Junkie, and don't forget to ring the notification bell.